Ladies and gentlemen, phew, I feel something stirring already. Tonight I didn't come to talk about loneliness. I came to talk about liberation. I came to break the myths, silence the noise, and speak to the soul that has been told, you're incomplete unless you're with somebody. The devil is a lie, because what if I told you, that living alone isn't a curse, it's a calling, that solitude isn't your punishment, it's your preparation. See, we've glamorized relationships, idolized companionship, but we've forgotten how to be whole by ourselves. We've forgotten that God does some of his best work in the wilderness when it's just you and him. And tonight I'm about to tell you why living alone can be not just good, but 10 times better than any relationship you've ever been in. So buckle up, because we're about to shift some mindsets, break some chains, and walk boldly into purpose. Alone but never lonely, living alone creates a sacred space where self-discovery can truly begin. In a world constantly telling us who we should be, where we should go, and who we should be with, solitude becomes a revolutionary act. It strips away the noise, it removes the distractions. It peels back the layers that we've wrapped ourselves in to fit into boxes we were never meant to occupy in the first place. When you're alone, you don't have to perform. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to negotiate your truth to make someone else comfortable. You just are, and it is in that stillness that you begin to hear your own voice again, the real one, not the one that echoes your parents' expectations or your friends' opinions or your past partner's projections. The one that speaks from your gut. That voice has been drowned out by the constant chatter of other people's needs, desires, and assumptions. But when you're alone, that voice gets louder. It gets clearer. It starts guiding you in a direction you didn't even know you needed to go. You begin to learn your rhythms. You figure out what makes you smile when no one's watching, what energizes you without applause, and what drains you even if it's dressed up as love. You learn how you deal with silence. It's not just in your home, but in your soul. You find out what fears creep up when there's no one there to soothe them for you, and more importantly, you learn how to soothe them yourself. You discover that some of the pain you thought came from others was really coming from within. That's when healing starts. Living alone challenges you to be accountable to yourself. There's no one else to blame for a messy room, missed deadlines, or neglected goals. It becomes real clear real fast who's running the show in your life. And spoiler alert, it's you. That's not a burden, that's a blessing. That's where power lies, because once you take full ownership of your life, nobody can take that from you. When you're alone, you're forced to confront your insecurities, and while that may sound terrifying, it's actually where your growth lies. You begin to ask yourself, why do I need someone else to validate my worth? Why do I feel empty without constant companionship? Why do I shrink in the presence of others just to avoid being alone again? These questions don't get answered overnight, but solitude gives you the space to sit with them, wrestle with them, and ultimately rise above them. You realize that the void you've been trying to fill with relationships, distractions, or noise was actually a call from your soul to return to yourself. Living alone also allows you to create an environment that reflects your essence. Your space becomes a mirror. Every picture on the wall, every scent you choose, every playlist you blast at 2 a.m. is a reflection of asterisk you. Asterisk not a compromise, not a negotiation, not a diluted version of your taste to keep someone else happy. It's yours, and as you curate that space, you begin to curate your spirit. You begin to recognize your own energy, what feels good, what feels forced, what needs to stay, and what absolutely must go. There's something undeniably powerful about waking up every day and not having to consider someone else's mood, opinions, or energy. That kind of emotional independence breeds clarity. It sharpens your decision-making. It strengthens your boundaries. It teaches you the difference between needing people and choosing them, because let me tell you, when you know how to be with yourself, you stop settling for half, love, for inconsistency, for convenience dressed as commitment. Self-discovery doesn't happen when life is loud. It happens in the quiet. It happens when you're not performing. It happens when you've run out of distractions and you're left with nothing but your reflection and the courage to finally look. It is not always glamorous. It is not always Instagram worthy. Sometimes it looks like crying on your kitchen floor or eating cereal for dinner because you didn't have the energy to cook. But even in those moments, you're learning something. You're learning resilience. You're learning grace. You're learning that you can fall apart and still be whole. Peace is the new luxury, and it's non-negotiable. In a society that glamorizes hustle, relationships, and constant interaction, choosing peace over chaos has become a radical act. When you live alone, you create a sanctuary that is untouched by someone else's emotional volatility, unresolved trauma, or toxic patterns. You begin to understand that peace is not just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of clarity, stability, and alignment with your spirit. It's the difference between sleeping through the night with ease or tossing and turning because of someone else's drama that you've inherited by proximity. Peace allows your nervous system to rest. Your body stops bracing for emotional impact. You no longer walk on eggshells or second, guess your words to avoid a fight. You don't have to over-explain, over-accommodate, or constantly decipher someone else's passive-aggressive signals. Instead, you breathe deeper. You think clearer. You reclaim all the mental bandwidth you used to waste managing dysfunction. And with that reclaimed energy, you start building habits, building vision, building a life that feels like home to you. When you live alone, you choose who gets access to your peace. That access becomes a privilege, not a right. You no longer invite chaos in just because it's familiar. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You begin to recognize that some people come wrapped in drama, and that no matter how much love you give, their storm will eventually flood your space. But when peace becomes your standard, you no longer try to save sinking ships that were never yours to steer. You let people go, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. You also begin to understand the beauty of your own company. There is a calm that comes from knowing you are not dependent on anyone else for your daily emotional temperature. Your joy is not subject to someone else's mood swings. Your schedule is not dictated by their availability. Your environment is not altered by their chaos. And in that stillness, you begin to hear the rhythm of your own peace. You recognize what makes your heart beat slower in the best way. You know which routines soothe your spirit. You know which spaces elevate your energy and which ones drain it. Peace doesn't mean you isolate yourself from love or community. It simply means you are no longer willing to trade your inner calm for external connection. It means you've stopped negotiating with your well-being. You stop picking up the phone for people who only call when they need something. You stop replying to energy vampires out of guilt. You stop entertaining half-present people just to avoid feeling alone, because now you know peace is better than presence, especially when that presence costs you your sanity. Living alone teaches you that silence isn't empty, it's sacred. It's in those quiet mornings when the sun creeps through your window and you sip your coffee without conversation that you realize how much noise you used to tolerate. How many things you accepted just to avoid the silence. How many fights you absorbed just to maintain false harmony. But now, silence is your healing. It's your mirror. It reflects what's been buried beneath the chaos for so long. When you start prioritizing peace, you start recognizing when something doesn't align faster. You don't wait 3 months to admit that someone's energy is off. You feel it in the first week. You don't gaslight yourself into thinking you're being too sensitive. You trust that your body knows when something's not right. And because your peace is non-negotiable, you no longer explain or justify your boundaries. You simply implement them. You don't force conversations. You don't chase closure. You don't beg for understanding. You choose quiet over confusion every single time. Peace gives you discernment. It's the difference between settling and selecting, between staying out of fear and walking away in faith. When your life becomes peaceful, you lose tolerance for anything that threatens that peace. That includes people, habits, environments, and even your own thoughts. You start auditing everything. You ask yourself, does this feel aligned? Does this bring me closer to peace or pull me into chaos? And the moment something disturbs your spirit, you make a choice not out of fear, but out of reverence for yourself. You realize that peace is not a destination. It's a decision you make daily. It's waking up and choosing not to invite disorder into your space. It's checking in with your spirit before you check your messages. It's creating rituals that keep you grounded, and when the world tries to pull you into its chaos, you return to your stillness like a sanctuary, because peace isn't passive, it's powerful. Wholeness is your responsibility, not your partner's job. This is a truth many people avoid because it requires ownership. It asks you to stop outsourcing your healing and happiness to another person and start taking accountability for the state of your own soul. Living alone puts this truth under a magnifying glass. There's no one there to rescue you from your own reflection. There's no one to distract you from the parts of yourself you'd rather not deal with. It's just you, and that's where the real work begins. When you're in a relationship, it's easy to believe that love will fix you, that if someone chooses you, validates you, supports you, you'll feel whole. But what often happens is that the relationship becomes a mirror reflecting all the parts you haven't healed. You start expecting your partner to fill in the emotional gaps you've never addressed. You expect them to understand wounds you haven't even explored yourself. And when they can't meet that need, because it was never theirs to meet in the first place, you call it failure when really it's misplacement. You placed a burden on someone else that was always meant to be carried by you. Living alone removes the illusion of dependence. You don't get to blame someone else for your unhappiness or emotional instability. If you wake up in a bad mood, you sit with it, you study it, you learn from it. If you feel empty, you have to ask yourself why. What have you been avoiding? What void have you been trying to cover up with noise, attention, or affection? It's in this space that you begin to understand that no one can make you whole. Not a romantic partner, not a friendship, not your family. Wholeness is internal work. You begin to nurture the parts of yourself that were neglected. You parent your inner child. You affirm your worth without needing someone else to echo it. You build rituals that reinforce your value. You stop waiting to be loved in a certain way and start loving yourself in the exact way you've always needed. You speak kindly to yourself. You give yourself grace. You don't avoid your flaws. You face them head on. You stop projecting them onto others and start transforming them into strengths. This journey of wholeness teaches you discernment. You learn how to recognize the difference between a partner and a crutch. You stop idolizing people just because they show up for you during a weak moment. You know now that presence doesn't equal purpose. Just because someone enters your life doesn't mean they're meant to complete you. You're already complete. Anyone who comes into your space now is not there to finish you. They're there to complement the masterpiece that's already in progress. Wholeness also redefines how you give and receive love. You no longer give from a place of depletion. You give because you are full. You give without expecting someone to patch you up in return. And because you're not desperate for emotional rescue, you can be selective. You can set boundaries. You can walk away when something doesn't serve your highest self. You don't stay because you're afraid to be alone. You've already seen the beauty of your own company. You've already survived your own silence. You know you can thrive without anyone else completing the picture. When you're whole, you don't fear solitude. You embrace it. You use it as a time to recharge, not as a punishment. You understand that being alone is not the same as being lonely. Loneliness is a lack of connection. Solitude is a connection with yourself, and that connection becomes the foundation for everything else. You no longer bend or break just to keep someone around. You don't compromise your peace for attention. You don't abandon yourself to hold on to someone else. You know who you are now. You've met yourself in the quiet. You've seen your strength without applause. Wholeness is a lifelong journey, but it begins when you stop waiting for someone else to do the work for you. It starts when you say, I'm not looking for someone to fix me. I'm committed to healing myself. It starts when you shift the narrative from I need someone to I choose myself. When that shift happens, every relationship in your life changes. You no longer relate from a place of lack, but from a place of overflow. You show up as a partner, not a project. You build connections based on purpose, not pain. Purpose thrives in quiet spaces. In the stillness of living alone, without the constant presence of another person's voice, emotions, or needs echoing around you, something powerful begins to rise. Clarity. When the world quiets down and the distractions fall away, you finally have the room to hear what's been whispering inside you all along. That inner voice, that deep knowing, that sense of calling that has always been there, but was too often drowned out by the noise of life, starts to speak louder, and for the first time you're able to listen. Purpose doesn't usually scream its way into your life. It rarely announces itself with flashing lights and booming voices. Instead, it nudges, it tugs gently. It speaks in patterns, in desires that won't go away, in thoughts that keep you up at night, in things that set your soul on fire while everything else feels routine. But to notice those things, you need space. Emotional space, mental space, physical space. Living alone creates that space in a way that few other life experiences can. You are no longer caught up in constant compromise or diluted by another person's vision. You are no longer spending your energy on trying to keep someone else happy or contorting yourself to fit into a relationship that doesn't align with where you're going. You begin to notice what you're naturally drawn to, what energizes you even when it doesn't come with validation or applause. You start experimenting with ideas, testing your creativity, allowing yourself to fail without judgment. You finally have the time to explore your passions without anyone questioning their practicality. There's no voice telling you it's unrealistic. There's no subtle discouragement disguised as concern. There's just you and that idea that keeps burning in your chest. You get to water it daily, you get to test the soil, and you get to see what grows when no one is watching. Purpose requires intentionality. It requires presence. It requires you to be in touch with what is true about you. Not the version of you someone else prefers, but the real, raw, unfiltered you. That version often doesn't show up in a crowded room. It doesn't emerge in constant conversation or surface-level connection. It shows up in the early mornings when it's just you and your thoughts. It shows up during long walks with no agenda. It shows up when you put down your phone, turn off the TV, and simply allow yourself to be. And in those moments, you realize that the path you've been looking for was never outside of you. It was buried beneath all the noise. Living alone teaches you to build a rhythm around your own purpose. You're no longer adjusting your schedule to someone else's preferences. You're no longer sacrificing your dream to preserve a relationship that isn't aligned. You get to protect your time like the sacred resource it is. You start saying no more easily. Not because you're being selfish, but because you're being strategic. You understand now that everything you say yes to that doesn't serve your purpose pulls you further away from what you're called to do. So you say no to distractions. You say no to drama. You say no to the good to make room for the great. You also begin to develop discipline, not the kind that's forced by obligation, but the kind that's born out of passion. When you're alone and pursuing your purpose, you show up differently. You create systems. You hold yourself accountable. You set goals that actually matter to you, not goals that impress others, but ones that align with your soul's calling. You learn to trust your intuition more, and your identity becomes rooted not in a relationship status, but in the impact you're here to make. There's a deeper level of satisfaction that comes from living in alignment with your purpose. It's not always glamorous, it's not always easy, but it's always fulfilling. And when you're living alone with no one else to distract or deter you, you get to build a life that is purpose. First, you get to pour your energy into something meaningful. You get to become the person you've always known you could be without apology and without compromise. That kind of focus, that kind of clarity, that kind of transformation. It doesn't just happen in chaos. It happens in quiet. Freedom is found in saying no without guilt. It's one of the most underrated powers a person can claim, and yet it's one of the most transformative. When you live alone, you start to see just how many times in your life you've said yes when your spirit was screaming no. You realize how often you agreed to things to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, or to maintain appearances. But when your peace is no longer tangled up in pleasing others, you get the space and the clarity to start choosing differently. Saying no is a declaration of self-worth. It means you know your limits. It means you honor your energy. It means you've learned that not every invitation is an assignment and not every opportunity is for you. Living alone teaches you that it's okay to decline, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. You stop explaining yourself. You stop shrinking to make people comfortable. You stop feeling guilty for honoring what feels right to you. That kind of freedom doesn't come from living for others. It comes from finally living for yourself. You also begin to recognize how much of your past exhaustion was tied to overcommitting. Not because you had to, but because you didn't know how to say no. Maybe you were raised to be agreeable, to be polite, to never rock the boat. Maybe you thought saying no made you selfish, unkind, or difficult. But the truth is, saying yes, when your heart isn't in it, isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment. It's performing. It's giving away pieces of yourself you should have been saving for your purpose, your peace, and your healing. Living alone helps you reclaim your time. Time that used to be filled with obligations you didn't enjoy. Conversations that drained you, plans that didn't serve you, people who didn't value you. You start looking at your calendar differently. You stop packing it to the brim just to feel productive or loved. You leave room for rest. You leave room for creativity. You leave room for the unexpected, for the sacred pauses that bring clarity. You say no to things that disrupt that rhythm because you've realized your time is sacred and your energy is currency. Freedom also looks like no longer needing permission. You don't ask others what they think before you make a decision about your own life. You don't check someone else's temperature before you speak your truth. You don't keep explaining why you've chosen to live differently, heal differently, or grow in a direction that doesn't make sense to everyone else. You've learned that peace is not always understood, and freedom is not always applauded. But that doesn't mean it's not right. You've learned to trust your no as much as your yes. You've learned that every boundary is a doorframe to a more authentic life. You stop entertaining guilt, tripping behavior. You start recognizing manipulation in the form of, "But I thought you'd be there," or "You always do this for me." You hear the undertone of entitlement and you don't let it move you. You respond with clarity, not apology. You can empathize without compromising. You can love people and still say no to things that don't feel aligned. That balance is where maturity lives. That's where growth lives. Saying no without guilt also shifts your relationships. People start to meet the real you, not the version of you who always says yes to be liked or accepted. Some relationships may fade, but the ones that remain become richer, more respectful, more honest. You start attracting people who honor your boundaries, who don't make you feel bad for choosing yourself. You realize that the people who benefit from your lack of boundaries were never really for you. And letting them go is not loss, it's liberation. You start to enjoy your own company more because you know your time is being spent intentionally. You're not rushing from one thing to the next, burned out from pleasing everyone but yourself. You're moving with purpose. You're making room for what matters. You're building a life that feels like freedom. Not because it's always easy, but because it's always real. You're not chasing validation. You're not measuring your worth by how useful or agreeable you are to others. You're rooted, you're aware, you're in control. That kind of control is priceless. You are not waiting to be chosen. You already are. This truth can be a game changer, a foundation, shaker, and a life transformer. For so long we've been conditioned to think that we are incomplete until someone else selects us, validates us, or decides we are worthy. We wait for relationships, opportunities, or achievements to give us a sense of value, believing that we are not enough until we are chosen. But the truth is, we've been chosen all along, and it's time to embrace that reality fully. When you live alone, you have the space to confront this myth head on. You realize that you don't need someone else's permission to feel whole, successful, or valuable. You are not defined by your relationship status or by the way others see you. In the silence of your own company, you discover that you've already been chosen by your Creator, by your own potential, and by the universe that supports your unique journey. The world doesn't determine your worth. You do. And that realization is both liberating and empowering. The moment you stop waiting to be chosen is the moment you stop seeking validation from external sources. No longer are you measuring your worth by how many likes you get on a social media post, how much attention you receive from others, or how much praise you garner from your achievements. You stop looking for approval outside of yourself because you've realized that the only approval that matters is your own. You stop comparing your journey to others and stop feeling behind or less than. You stop telling yourself that you're not enough until someone else says you are. Instead, you start showing up fully for yourself, knowing that your value has never been in question. It's been there all along. Living alone gives you the space to cultivate that self-acceptance. You begin to recognize that you don't need anyone else to affirm your choices, your dreams, or your path. You've learned to trust your instincts, your passions, and your intuition. You start to make decisions from a place of confidence rather than desperation, choosing what aligns with your true self instead of what will make others happy or what will look good on the outside. You realize that when you choose yourself first, you attract the people and opportunities that align with who you are, not who you're pretending to be or who you think others want you to be. This also shifts the way you engage in relationships. When you no longer feel like you're waiting to be chosen, you approach love, friendship, and connection from a place of abundance, not scarcity. You realize that you don't have to chase after love or beg for attention. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. People who truly see you, who truly value you, will choose you without hesitation. And when they don't, you understand that it's not a reflection of your worth, but of their own limitations. You no longer settle for half love, for relationships that drain you, or for connections that only serve to fulfill someone else's needs at the expense of your own. When you stop waiting to be chosen, you also stop settling for less than you deserve. You stop giving your energy to relationships, jobs, or situations that don't honor your value. You stop putting yourself in positions where you feel overlooked, undervalued, or unappreciated. You stop bending yourself into shapes that don't fit just to be accepted. You become more selective in how you spend your time and with whom you spend it. And in that selectivity, you find freedom. You realize that you are worthy of the highest form of love, respect, and recognition. Not because of anything you need to prove, but because you already are everything you've been waiting for. You also stop attaching your identity to external factors. Your worth is not tied to your job title, your relationship status, or how many people approve of you. Your worth is inherent, unshakable, and not dependent on any external validation. When you live alone and begin to embrace this truth, you let go of the need for constant reassurance. You let go of the need to prove yourself in order to be accepted. You start to make decisions based on your purpose, your values, and your desires, unapologetically and without hesitation. There's a profound sense of empowerment that comes with realizing that you've already been chosen. You are chosen by the person who matters most, yourself. The moment you choose to step into your own worth is the moment you stop waiting for anyone else to recognize it. You start living with the confidence that everything you desire is already within your reach. And you start attracting the people and opportunities that reflect that truth. You don't have to wait for someone else to say you're worthy. You already know you are, and that knowing changes everything.